Some people spend the first half of their lives wondering why everyone else seems to be moving faster, while others appear to know exactly what they want, build careers early, form powerful networks, and become confident in their identity. This person is often standing slightly outside the crowd, watching, thinking, questioning, and trying to understand what truly matters. From the outside, it can look like hesitation, it can look like weakness, it can even look like failure. But there is another possibility that is far more interesting. What if the person who seems behind is actually developing strengths that take years to become visible? What if the quiet person who struggled to fit into the usual path is not falling behind at all, but slowly building a completely different kind of advantage? This is where the story of one of the rarest personality patterns becomes fascinating. The INFJ personality type is often described as one of the least common types in the Myers-Briggs system, and people associated with this pattern are commonly described as private, intuitive, reflective, deeply focused on meaning, and highly aware of the emotions and behavior of others. But the real story is not about having a rare label. It is about what can happen when a person with deep internal processing enters a world that rewards speed, visibility, confidence, and immediate results. In the early years, that difference can feel like a disadvantage. A person may watch classmates move forward while they are still questioning their direction. They may see friends become successful while they are still trying to understand what kind of life would actually make them feel fulfilled. They may take longer to choose a career because they are not simply asking, "What can I do?" They are asking, "What is worth doing?" That question can slow a person down in the beginning, but it can also change the destination completely. In this video, we are going to explore why certain deeply reflective personality patterns can appear to develop more slowly, why their strongest qualities often become more useful with age, and why the person who feels behind at 25 can look completely different at 40. We will look at the hidden advantages of observation, patience, emotional awareness, selective relationships, long-term thinking, and self-knowledge. We will also examine the darker side of these traits because being sensitive does not automatically make someone wise, and being rare does not automatically make someone successful. In fact, some of the same qualities that can eventually become strengths can create serious problems when they are left undeveloped. Deep thinking can become overthinking. Sensitivity can become emotional exhaustion. High standards can become perfectionism. Solitude can become isolation. Idealism can become disappointment. That is why this story is not about telling you that a certain personality type is destined to win. It is about understanding how a person can turn their natural tendencies into useful strengths through experience, discipline, and maturity. And there is one part of this transformation that most people rarely talk about. The greatest advantage may not appear when this person is young. It may appear after years of mistakes, failed relationships, career uncertainty, disappointment, and self-discovery. Early in life, a reflective person may spend too much energy trying to be understood. They explain why they need space. They explain why certain environments drain them. They explain why they do not enjoy shallow relationships. They explain why they cannot simply follow the path everyone else is following. But eventually, many people reach a point where they stop trying to convince everyone else that their way of living makes sense. They begin to understand themselves. They become more selective. They stop giving every person access to their energy. They stop accepting every opportunity simply because it looks impressive. They start asking different questions. Is this meaningful? Is this sustainable? Does this fit the person I am becoming? That shift can completely change the direction of a life. Because success is not always about moving first. Sometimes it is about knowing where you are going before you move too far. And this is where the idea of the late bloomer becomes much more powerful. A late bloomer is not necessarily someone who lacks ability. Sometimes it is someone whose abilities require experience before they become valuable. A young person may know how to work hard, but still not know what deserves their effort. They may be intelligent, but not yet understand people. They may be ambitious, but not yet understand themselves. They may have talent, but no clear direction. Time changes that. Experience creates context. Failure creates judgment. Solitude can create self-awareness. Difficult relationships can teach boundaries. Mistakes can reveal what actually matters. Years of observing people can sharpen social judgment. And slowly, qualities that once made a person feel different can become the foundation of their strength. That is why the contrast between early success and late success deserves a closer look. The person who becomes successful at 22 may have an advantage that is visible immediately. The person who becomes successful at 40 may have spent 20 years developing qualities that were almost invisible while they were forming. Their strength may not be loud. It may not attract attention in a crowded room, but it can become remarkably stable. They may know themselves better. They may understand their limits. They may recognize unhealthy patterns faster. They may have less need for approval. They may be more patient with long-term goals. They may finally stop comparing their timeline with everyone else's. And that final change can be one of the most important transformations of all, because comparison creates a false race. It makes people believe life has a universal schedule. Graduate by this age, build a career by this age, become wealthy by this age, find a partner by this age, know your purpose by this age. But human development does not follow one fixed calendar. People mature differently. Skills develop at different speeds. Personality traits interact with environment, experience, choices, and opportunity. A person who appears lost at one stage of life can become remarkably focused later. A person who once doubted every decision can eventually become extremely decisive because they have spent years learning what not to choose. And that is the question we are going to follow throughout this video. Why do some people seem to become stronger with age instead of peaking early? Why can deep reflection become an advantage later in life? Why do certain quiet people become more confident when they stop trying to compete with louder personalities? And perhaps most importantly, what separates the person who simply waits for life to improve from the person who uses their difficult early years to become stronger? Because being a late bloomer is not a magical advantage. Time alone does not create wisdom. Struggle alone does not create success. A person can experience years of difficulty and remain stuck in the same patterns. The real transformation happens when experience becomes learning, when pain becomes information, when failure becomes feedback, when solitude becomes self-knowledge, when sensitivity becomes emotional intelligence, when reflection becomes action. That is the difference between simply getting older and actually becoming stronger. By the end of this video, you will understand why the person who once felt out of place may eventually become one of the most grounded people in the room. You will understand why their early uncertainty may have been part of a deeper process, why their success can arrive later, and why the qualities that seem inconvenient in youth can become powerful assets in adulthood. And there is one final idea I want you to keep in mind as we begin. The world often rewards what it can see quickly: confidence, status, money, popularity, achievement. But some of the most important forms of development happen where nobody can see them. Judgment develops quietly. Emotional maturity develops quietly. Self-knowledge develops quietly. Discipline develops quietly. And sometimes the person who looks like they are doing nothing is actually preparing for a life that requires much more depth than the world around them expected. So stay with me until the end, because we are going to uncover the psychological pattern behind this late rise and the moment when a person can finally turn years of feeling different into a genuine advantage. Welcome to our channel, where we explore psychology, personality, human behavior, and the hidden forces shaping the way people think and live. If you enjoy deep psychological ideas explained in simple terms, subscribe to the channel and let's begin. The word rare can make a personality type sound almost mysterious, but rarity is not the same thing as superiority.
When people hear that INFJ is often described as one of the rarest Briggs personality types,
It is easy to turn that fact into a simple story. Rare means special, special means smarter, smarter means more successful, but psychology is rarely that simple. The Myers-Briggs type indicator is a personality framework, not a crystal ball that can predict the future of a person. Different samples and data sets can produce different estimates of how common each type is, so it is more accurate to say that INFJ is commonly described as one of the less common types rather than treating rarity as an absolute fact that applies equally to every population. And that distinction matters because the interesting part of the INFJ pattern is not the number of people who receive the label. The interesting part is the combination of preferences represented by those four letters. I stands for introversion, N stands for intuition, F stands for feeling, J stands for judging. In simple terms, introversion is associated with a tendency to direct attention inward and recharge through time away from constant social stimulation. Intuition points toward patterns, possibilities, meanings, and what might exist beneath the obvious facts. Feeling relates to making decisions with strong attention to values, people, relationships, and human consequences. Judging in the Myers-Briggs system does not mean judging other people. It refers more to a preference for structure, organization, planning, and having some sense of closure. Put those tendencies together, and you get a personality pattern that can appear unusual in environments built around speed and external competition. A person with this pattern may spend more time processing an experience before responding to it. They may notice the emotional atmosphere of a conversation while everyone else is focused on the words. They may care deeply about whether their work has meaning rather than simply asking whether it pays well. They may want structure, but still spend years searching for a direction that feels personally right. None of this means every INFJ behaves the same way. Personality types are broad descriptions, not complete human beings. Two people with the same four-letter type can have completely different childhoods, cultures, abilities, values, opportunities, and life experiences. That is why this video is not about proving that INFJs are destined for success. They are not. It is about understanding a pattern that can help explain why some deeply reflective people appear to develop more slowly, only to become much more grounded later in life. The difference can be subtle at first. A young person may sit quietly during a discussion while another person speaks confidently and immediately receives attention. The quiet person may have noticed 5 different problems with the idea, but may not yet know how to communicate them. The confident person may appear more capable simply because their ability is easier to see. This creates one of the first misunderstandings surrounding reflective personalities. The world often measures what is visible. It notices who speaks first, who takes charge, who makes connections quickly, who promotes themselves, who seems certain, and who appears comfortable in competition. It does not always notice the person who is silently analyzing everything. And when a person repeatedly watches other people move ahead, a dangerous thought can begin to form. Maybe I am behind. Maybe I am less capable. Maybe everyone else understands life better than I do. That thought can become especially powerful during the early adult years because those years are filled with visible milestones. People graduate, people get promoted, people move to better cities, people buy homes, people become financially independent, people enter relationships, people build online audiences. Every achievement seems to become evidence in an invisible competition. The problem is that the competition itself is often imaginary. There is no universal schedule for becoming confident, finding meaningful work, developing emotional maturity, or understanding yourself, yet young adults are constantly surrounded by signals suggesting that there is. At 23, someone may already have a successful career while another person is still changing direction. At 27, one person may be earning a high income while another is taking a lower paying job because they are trying to build a completely different future. At 30, someone may appear settled while another person is starting again. From the outside, the first person looks ahead, but the outside view cannot reveal the quality of the foundation underneath. A person can arrive early at the wrong destination. Another person can arrive later at the right one. That does not mean the second person should romanticize being late. It simply means speed and direction are different measurements. Deeply reflective people can sometimes take longer to commit because commitment has a higher psychological cost for them. They do not only see the opportunity, they see the consequences. They may think about what happens if they choose the wrong career, move to the wrong city, enter the wrong relationship, or spend 5 years building something they never truly wanted. That awareness can become excessive and turn into hesitation. But when it is balanced, it can produce something valuable: intentionality. Instead of asking only what is available, they begin asking what is worth pursuing. Instead of asking what looks successful, they ask what will still matter years from now. And that question can make the early stages of life look slower than they really are. There is another reason these people can feel behind. Many modern environments reward immediate social performance. The person who can walk into a room and make 10 contacts in 20 minutes may appear naturally successful. The person who needs time to understand people before trusting them may appear distant. The person who can confidently promote their own achievements
may receive more opportunities than the person who quietly does excellent work and assumes the work will speak for itself.
The person who can make a quick decision may look decisive, even when the decision is poorly considered. Meanwhile, the reflective person may still be evaluating the situation. This creates an unusual problem. The very qualities that can eventually produce careful judgment can look like weakness before they are developed. A person who thinks deeply can look uncertain. A person who notices emotional details can look sensitive. A person who wants meaningful work can look unrealistic. A person who dislikes shallow relationships can look antisocial. A person who wants to understand before acting can look slow. But these interpretations often come from judging behavior without understanding the process underneath it. The mature version of reflection is not endless hesitation. It is better judgment. The mature version of sensitivity is not emotional fragility. It is awareness. The mature version of solitude is not isolation. It is the ability to be alone without losing yourself. The mature version of idealism is not naivete. It is having standards while still understanding reality. These transformations take time, and that is why age can matter. A trait does not exist in a vacuum. Experience changes how a person uses it. A young person may have extraordinary sensitivity but no boundaries. After years of difficult relationships, that same sensitivity can become a powerful ability to read situations without immediately absorbing them. A young person may be highly intuitive but lack practical experience. Years later, that intuition can be supported by thousands of observations and become much more accurate. A young person may be idealistic and easily disappointed. Later, that idealism can become a clear sense of purpose combined with realistic expectations. The raw material may have been there from the beginning. Life teaches the person how to use it. One of the most important hidden advantages of this personality pattern is observation. The observer often notices things other people rush past: a change in someone's tone, a contradiction between what a person says and what they repeatedly do, a small shift in the emotional atmosphere of a group, a pattern that appears again and again in a relationship, a weakness in an argument that nobody else seems to notice. A quiet person can spend years collecting these observations without anyone realizing it. This can make them appear passive. They may not dominate conversations. They may not constantly express opinions. They may prefer to listen, but listening and passivity are not the same thing. Observation becomes powerful when it eventually produces judgment. A person who simply notices everything but never acts remains trapped in observation. A person who notices patterns, evaluates them, and makes better decisions because of them is developing a genuine advantage. This is where we need to separate reflection from overthinking. They may look similar from the outside, but psychologically they lead in opposite directions. Overthinking creates more questions without creating better decisions. Reflection creates understanding that can eventually support action. Overthinking says, "What if everything goes wrong?" Reflection asks, "What can I learn from what already happened?" Overthinking repeatedly replays the same conversation. Reflection asks what the conversation reveals about the relationship. Overthinking imagines every possible future. Reflection identifies the most important possibilities and decides what deserves attention. This distinction can take years to learn. A young reflective person may spend hours analyzing a message, a conversation, or a career decision. With maturity, they can learn that not every detail requires a conclusion. Not every person requires an explanation. Not every uncertainty can be eliminated before action begins. That lesson is incredibly important because the goal of deep thinking is not to think forever. The goal is to think well enough to move. And this is one reason success may take longer to appear. There is a difference between optimizing for immediate rewards and optimizing for long-term fit. Immediate rewards are easy to measure. A bigger salary, a better title, more followers, more social attention, a larger network, a more impressive job description. These things can be valuable, but they are not the entire picture. A reflective person may be more concerned with whether a career fits their values, whether the environment allows them to do meaningful work, whether the people around them are trustworthy, and whether the path can be sustained for years. That can create slower visible progress, but slow visible progress does not automatically mean slow internal development. Someone can spend 3 years building expertise in a field without receiving much recognition. Someone can spend 5 years learning how people behave without being able to put that knowledge on a resume. Someone can spend a decade developing emotional maturity and have no public achievement that proves it happened. Yet those qualities can become extremely valuable later. Career research supports a broader version of this idea. Personality traits are related to work outcomes, with traits such as conscientiousness showing meaningful associations with aspects of career performance and success. But the important point is that no personality type controls destiny. Personality can influence tendencies, preferences, and behavior, while environment, opportunity, skills, education, force, decisions, and circumstances also matter. That is why saying INFJs succeed late should never be treated as a scientific law. It is better understood as a pattern that can describe some people's experiences. The real advantage appears when a person learns to work with their tendencies rather than being controlled by them. If they are naturally reflective, they can use reflection to make better decisions. If they value meaning, they can use that value to choose meaningful goals. If they are sensitive to people, they can develop emotional boundaries. If they prefer structure, they can turn that preference into consistent habits. Personality becomes useful when it is translated into behavior. As these people grow older, another transformation often begins. They become selective. When they are young, they may desperately want to belong. They may say yes because they fear disappointing people. They may stay in relationships longer than they should because they can see the potential in someone. They may accept opportunities that look impressive because they believe every opportunity must be taken. They may spend enormous amounts of energy trying to maintain peace. They may listen to everyone else's problems while ignoring their own. Their ability to understand other perspectives can become a weakness when they use it to excuse behavior that should have consequences. But experience teaches a difficult lesson. Understanding someone does not require tolerating everything they do. Empathy does not require unlimited access. Compassion does not require self-abandonment. And being able to see why someone behaves badly does not mean you must keep them in your life. This is where selectiveness becomes a form of strength. The person begins to understand that energy is limited, time is limited, attention is limited, emotional capacity is limited. Every yes has a cost. Every relationship requires some form of investment. Every career path consumes years. Every commitment closes certain doors while opening others. When this becomes clear, the person stops treating every option as equally important. They begin to choose. Not every opportunity deserves their energy. Not every person deserves their trust. Not every argument deserves a response. Not every invitation deserves a yes. Not every career path deserves another 5 years simply because they have already invested 5 years in it. This is a major difference between being agreeable and being intentional. Earlier in life, the person may have wanted to fit into every environment. Later, they begin asking whether the environment deserves them. That shift can dramatically improve their life. Their social circle may become smaller, but the relationships can become deeper. Their career options may become narrower, but their direction becomes clearer. Their schedule may contain fewer commitments, but their attention becomes stronger.
Their life may look less impressive from the outside,
But it can feel far more aligned from the inside. This is also where the late bloomer story becomes emotionally powerful. A person who once believed that success meant being accepted everywhere eventually learns that success can mean knowing where you belong. They stop trying to become the kind of person every room will approve of. They start becoming the kind of person they respect. That is a different form of confidence. It does not need constant validation. It does not depend on being the most interesting person in the room. It does not require everyone to understand the decision. It can be quiet. It can even look ordinary. But it is stable because it is built on self-knowledge. The person begins to understand their energy patterns. They know which environments help them think clearly. They know which people leave them feeling grounded and which relationships repeatedly create confusion. They know what kind of work allows them to stay focused. They know which ambitions actually belong to them and which ambitions were inherited from family, culture, peers, or social media. This process can take years because it requires experimentation. You cannot always think your way into self-knowledge. Sometimes you have to live through the wrong choice. You have to take the job that looked perfect and discover that it drains you. You have to enter a relationship that teaches you what you will no longer accept. You have to pursue a goal that looked impressive and discover that achievement without meaning leaves you empty. These experiences can be painful, but they create information, and information changes judgment. The person who once needed every decision to be perfect begins to understand that decisions can simply be informative. A wrong choice is not always wasted time. Sometimes it is a clearer map. Depth also compounds. This is one of the least visible advantages of a reflective personality. The first year of studying human behavior may not make a person unusually wise. The first year of building expertise may not make them exceptional. The first year of learning emotional regulation may not change their entire life. But years of repetition can produce a very different result. A person who spends 10 years studying a subject is not simply 10 times more experienced than someone who studied it for 1 year. Their knowledge connects. Concepts begin to interact. Patterns become easier to recognize. Mistakes become easier to avoid. The same principle applies to emotional development. A person who spends years observing their own reactions can eventually recognize them much faster. They know when they are becoming defensive. They know when fear is influencing a decision. They know when they are seeking approval. They know when they are avoiding a difficult conversation. They know when they are confusing intuition with anxiety. This distinction is powerful. Intuition and anxiety can both arrive as strong feelings, but they do not always mean the same thing. Anxiety often demands immediate certainty. Mature intuition can remain calm enough to observe. A person who has spent years learning themselves becomes better at distinguishing internal signals. Their sensitivity becomes more useful because it is no longer completely uncontrolled. They can notice an emotion without immediately obeying it. They can feel disappointment without turning it into a conclusion about their worth. They can sense tension without automatically assuming they caused it. They can care about someone without taking responsibility for every emotion that person experiences. The same compounding process can happen with professional skills. A person who quietly studies a subject for years may suddenly appear successful when the world finally notices their expertise. But the visible success is often the final stage of a much longer invisible process. This is why late success can look sudden from the outside. It is rarely sudden from the inside. The breakthrough may happen in 1 year, but the preparation can take 10. People see the promotion. They do not see the evenings spent learning. They see the successful business. They do not see the years of failed attempts. They see the confident speaker. They do not see the thousands of hours spent developing knowledge. They see the emotionally mature person. They do not see the painful experiences that forced them to develop boundaries. Depth is difficult to measure while it is forming. That is precisely why it can feel so frustrating. You can spend years building qualities that produce no immediate applause. But life does not always reward every stage of development at the moment it happens. Sometimes the reward arrives later, when several developed qualities suddenly work together. Patience supports consistency. Consistency creates skill. Skill creates confidence. Confidence improves decision-making. Better decisions create better opportunities. Better opportunities create more experience. Experience improves judgment. Judgment creates selectiveness. Selectiveness protects energy. Protected energy makes deeper work possible, and the cycle continues. With age, this can also change how a person interprets other people. Younger people often judge behavior by stated intentions. Someone says they care, so they believe they care. Someone promises to change, so they focus on the promise. Someone says they respect them, so they assume respect exists. Experience can create a different standard. The person starts from patterns instead of isolated moments. They notice whether behavior matches language. They notice whether apologies are followed by change. They notice whether kindness appears only when someone wants something. They notice whether a person's treatment of others changes when there is no benefit involved. They notice whether someone respects boundaries when those boundaries become inconvenient. This does not require becoming cynical. In fact, mature discernment is almost the opposite of cynicism. Cynicism assumes everyone is selfish. Discernment recognizes that people are complicated and evaluates behavior carefully. The goal is not to distrust everyone. The goal is to stop giving blind trust to people who repeatedly demonstrate that they cannot handle it. This can make a mature, reflective person harder to manipulate, not because they become cold, but because they become slower to ignore patterns. Emotional pressure becomes easier to recognize. Guilt can become easier to separate from responsibility. Flattery becomes less powerful when self-worth is internal. Dramatic promises become less convincing when behavior repeatedly contradicts them. The person learns that someone can be charming and still be unreliable. Someone can be wounded and still behave unfairly. Someone can have good intentions and still cause harm. Someone can love you and still be incapable of giving you what you need. These are difficult lessons because they remove simple explanations, but they also create emotional maturity. One of the biggest turning points comes when this person stops trying so hard to be understood. Earlier in life, being misunderstood can feel almost unbearable. If someone interprets them incorrectly, they want to explain. If someone thinks they are distant, they explain their need for solitude. If someone thinks they are too serious, they explain what they care about. If someone questions their career choice, they defend it. If someone does not understand why they walked away from a relationship, they provide the entire story. There is a natural desire behind this. They want people to see the intention behind their behavior. They want their internal world to make sense to the people around them. But eventually, many learn that understanding cannot be forced. You can explain yourself perfectly and still be misunderstood. You can tell the truth and still be judged. You can make a reasonable decision and still disappoint someone. You can have good intentions and still be interpreted negatively. Once this becomes clear, something inside the person becomes quieter. They stop treating every misunderstanding as an emergency. They stop spending hours constructing explanations for people who have already decided what they believe. They stop chasing approval from people who are committed to misunderstanding them. This does not mean they become arrogant. It means they become less dependent on external interpretation. Their internal standards become more important than universal approval. That can be one of the strongest forms of confidence a person develops. This change also affects their relationships. They begin to understand that being deeply understood by a few people can be more valuable than being socially accepted by many. They become less interested in collecting contacts and more interested in building trust. They stop measuring friendship by frequency and start measuring it by reliability. They stop ask whether someone likes them and start asking whether the relationship is healthy. They become more comfortable saying no. They become more comfortable leaving conversations unfinished when continuing them would only create conflict. They become more comfortable allowing other people to have opinions about them. This is important because emotional maturity often involves tolerating the fact that not everyone will approve of you. A person who needs universal approval is controlled by everyone. Every criticism can change their mood. Every rejection can change their self-image. Every disagreement can create anxiety. But when someone develops an internal standard, external reactions become information rather than commands. Criticism can be evaluated. Praise can be appreciated without becoming addictive. Rejection can hurt without becoming identity. Disagreement can exist without destroying connection. This kind of emotional stability often takes time because younger people naturally care more about belonging. As identity becomes stronger, belonging becomes more selective. The 30s and 40s can therefore look very different for someone who has spent years developing this internal foundation. Again, this is not a guarantee. Age does not automatically make people wiser. Some people repeat the same patterns for decades. But for those who actively learn from experience, adulthood can provide something that youth cannot easily provide: context. At 20, a painful experience can feel like the end of the world because there is not enough history to place it into perspective. At 40, the same person may understand that one failure was only one chapter. A relationship ending may no longer mean they are unlovable. A career setback may longer mean they are incapable. A period of loneliness may no longer mean they will always be alone. Experience creates reference points. The person can look backward and see patterns. They can remember situations that once felt impossible and recognize that they survived them. That memory changes resilience. They begin to trust themselves, not because life became easier, but because they have evidence that they can handle difficulty. This is one reason self-confidence can increase with age. Confidence does not always come from believing that nothing will go wrong. Sometimes it comes from knowing that something can go wrong and you will still find a way forward. The same context can transform career decisions. A young person may choose a career because it is respected. Later, they may realize respect does not compensate for constant exhaustion. A young person may chase money because money represents security. Later, they may understand that enough money combined with meaningful work can be more satisfying than endless income growth. A young person may seek status because status feels like proof of worth. Later, they may recognize that status can become another form of dependence. This does not mean money, achievement, or ambition are bad. It means their meaning can change as self-knowledge improves. The person stops asking what will make them look successful and begins asking what will make their life sustainable. That is a major shift. Sustainable success is often less dramatic than early achievement. It can mean doing work you can continue doing without destroying yourself. It can mean earning enough while maintaining relationships and health. It can mean choosing a smaller life that gives you control instead of a larger life that consumes all your time. It can mean becoming excellent at one thing rather than trying to impress everyone with 10 things. A reflective personality can become particularly powerful here because the person may be naturally drawn toward meaning, but maturity teaches them to connect meaning with practical action. There is also a darker side that must be confronted. Rare does not mean special. Being uncommon does not mean being better. A personality label should never become an excuse for avoiding growth. Saying, I am an introvert, so I cannot communicate is not self-awareness. Saying, I am sensitive, so everyone says want to come accommodate me is not emotional maturity. Saying, I am intuitive, so I do not need evidence is not wisdom. Saying, I need deep connections, so I do not have to maintain relationships is not depth. Personality language can become dangerous when it turns into a permanent identity that prevents development. The purpose of understanding personality should be to increase self-awareness, not reduce responsibility. If someone knows they overthink, the goal is not to proudly identify as an overthinker. The goal is to learn how to decide. If someone knows they avoid conflict, the goal is not to say, that is just my personality. The goal is to develop healthier communication. If someone knows they become emotionally overwhelmed, the goal is to learn regulation and boundaries. A personality framework becomes useful when it helps a person understand where effort is needed. For a deeply reflective person, one of the biggest risks is turning self-awareness into self-absorption. There is a difference between understanding yourself and constantly analyzing yourself. You can spend so much time asking why you feel something that you never do anything about it. You can analyze your childhood for years while repeating the same behavior in the present. You can read hundreds of books about relationships while avoiding the difficult conversation sitting in front of you. You can study productivity while never building a routine. You can study personality types while using the label to explain every behavior. Knowledge becomes valuable only when it changes behavior. This is where the late bloomer story becomes less romantic and more demanding. The person does not succeed simply because they are thoughtful. They succeed when thought becomes action. They do not become emotionally mature simply because they feel deeply. They become mature when they learn what to do with those feelings. They do not become successful simply because they are selective. They become successful when they select a direction and commit to it. Perfectionism can be another hidden obstacle. A person who sees many possibilities may struggle to choose one. They can imagine every weakness in a plan, They can anticipate every criticism. They can see how the project could be improved. This can create a dangerous cycle. The person waits until they feel ready. Then they wait for better conditions. Then they notice another problem. Then they improve the plan again. Years can pass while preparation continues. At some point, The person has to understand that perfection is often another name for fear when it prevents action. A mature version of high standards does not demand perfection before beginning. It demands improvement after beginning. The person learns to create something imperfect, observe the result, and make it better. This is a major transition because it turns internal intelligence into external evidence. The world cannot reward potential that never becomes visible. The person who once spent years thinking about what they could do finally starts doing it. That is often when their development becomes noticeable. There is another transformation that matters even more. Sensitivity becomes awareness instead of absorption. Highly sensitive people can pick up emotional signals quickly, but if they absorb every emotion around them, their sensitivity becomes exhausting. Someone else is angry and they feel responsible. Someone else is disappointed and they feel guilty. Someone else is anxious and they become anxious. Someone else is unhappy and they immediately try to fix it. This can create a life where the person is constantly managing emotional environments that do not belong to them. With maturity, they can learn a crucial distinction. I can notice your emotion without owning it. I can care without fixing. I can listen without carrying. I can understand why you are angry without us accepting unfair treatment. I can love someone without making their emotional state my responsibility. This is where boundaries become powerful. Boundaries are not walls against humanity. They are rules for healthy participation. They tell the person where their responsibility ends. And once that boundary becomes clear, their emotional energy becomes available for more important things. Solitude can undergo a similar transformation. Earlier in life, solitude may feel like proof of rejection. The person sees others gathering, dating, traveling, celebrating, and building social circles. Being alone can feel like evidence that something is wrong. Later, solitude can become a workspace. It can create room for reading, learning, writing, thinking, planning, and building. The same external condition can have completely different psychological meanings depending on the person's relationship with themselves. This does not mean isolation is healthy. Human beings need connection. The point is that being alone and being lonely are not identical experiences. A person who becomes comfortable with solitude may become less desperate for relationships that do not fit. They can choose companionship instead of using companionship as an escape from themselves. That changes the quality of relationships they enter. They are less likely to accept poor treatment simply because being alone feels frightening. They can walk away when necessary because solitude no longer feels like punishment. As these changes accumulate, the person can develop something that was difficult to possess when younger. Patience. Patience is often misunderstood as passivity. It is not. Real patience means being able to continue meaningful action without demanding immediate evidence that the effort is working. This is extremely important for long-term success. A person may spend months building a skill with no visible reward. They may spend years developing a career before reaching the level they want. They may work on emotional patterns that take repeated practice to change. They may create something that receives little attention at first. If they require immediate validation, they will quit. But if they can tolerate the quiet period, their skills have time to compound. This is one reason a reflective person can become more dangerous to underestimate with age. The young version may need proof that the effort is working. The mature version can continue without applause. They have learned that some results arrive late. They have learned that progress is not always visible. They have learned that consistency can feel boring while it is producing enormous change. This also explains why the person may eventually appear more confident than people who seemed far more confident when they were young. Early confidence can come from certainty. Later confidence can come from evidence. The young person may say, "I know I can do this," because they have never experienced serious failure. The mature person may say, I can probably handle this because they have failed before and survived. The second kind of confidence is quieter. It does not need to prove itself. It does not need to dominate the room. It can admit uncertainty. It can say, I do not know. It can change its mind when evidence changes. That is not weakness. It is intellectual flexibility. And for someone whose personality naturally encourages deep reflection, this can become a major strength when combined with humility. The late success story becomes even more interesting when we consider how social comparison changes over time. In youth, people often compare outcomes. Who has the better job? Who makes more money? Who has the better relationship? Who looks happier? Who has more followers? Who seems more confident? But with age, many people begin comparing systems rather than outcomes. They ask, how does this person actually live? How much control do they have over their time? How stable are their relationships? How much stress is hidden behind the achievement? Do they enjoy what they built? Are they becoming healthier or simply busier? These questions reveal a deeper understanding of success. A person who once wanted the appearance of success may eventually want the experience of a good life. That is a profound change, and it often takes years because young people are naturally more sensitive to status. As identity becomes stronger, status can lose some of its power. This is where the person who once felt late can begin to see their earlier years differently. The years that seemed wasted may contain the raw materials for their strongest qualities. The awkwardness taught observation. The loneliness taught self-reliance. The failed relationships taught boundaries. The career confusion taught self-knowledge. The periods of rejection taught resilience. The years of uncertainty taught patience. But there is an important warning here. Pain does not automatically produce wisdom. Suffering can make someone stronger, but it can also make someone bitter. Failure can create resilience, but it can also create avoidance. Loneliness can create independence, but it can also create emotional walls. The difference lies in processing. What does the person do with the experience? Do they extract a lesson? Do they adjust their behavior? Do they seek better information? Do they develop a healthier response? Or do they simply repeat the story? This is why the late bloomer is not defined by having a difficult past. They are defined by what they build from it. The same principle applies to idealism. A deeply values-driven person may enter adulthood believing that people should be honest, relationships should be meaningful, work should have purpose, and effort should be rewarded fairly. Reality eventually challenges these beliefs. People can be selfish, organizations can be political, relationships can end despite genuine love, hard work can go unnoticed, good intentions can produce bad outcomes. If the person cannot adapt, idealism can become bitterness. They may conclude that nothing matters because reality did not match their expectations. But a mature person can preserve the value while changing the expectation. They can remain principled without expecting everyone else to be. They can pursue meaningful work without believing every workplace will be meaningful. They can love people while accepting that people are imperfect. They can maintain standards without demanding perfection. This is the transition from idealism to grounded purpose. It is one of the most important forms of maturity because it allows a person to stay emotionally open without becoming naive. And this is where their curiosity can become expertise. Curiosity is often associated with asking questions, exploring ideas, and looking beyond obvious answers. But curiosity without discipline can become scattered attention. The mature person learns to focus it. Instead of exploring everything, they choose a few areas worth mastering. Instead of reading endlessly, they apply what they learn. Instead of collecting information, they build a framework. Over time, the combination of curiosity and consistency can produce unusual depth. They may understand their field at a level that cannot be developed quickly. They know not only the basic answers, but also the exceptions, patterns, history, trade-offs, and hidden problems. their knowledge becomes interconnected. This is when the person who once looked uncertain can become highly competent, not because they suddenly became intelligent, but because years of focused learning finally became visible. The same thing can happen socially. A person who spent years observing human behavior may eventually become remarkably good at reading situations. They know when to speak and when to remain silent. They understand that not every disagreement needs to become a confrontation. They recognize when someone wants advice and when someone simply wants to be heard. They can distinguish vulnerability from manipulation. They can recognize when a person is genuinely apologizing and when they are trying to end an uncomfortable conversation. These abilities are not supernatural. They come from attention, experience, memory, and pattern recognition. The mature person is not necessarily better at reading minds. They are simply better at watching behavior over time. That difference matters because isolated moments can mislead. Patterns are harder to fake. Eventually, the person may also stop trying to predict every outcome. This is another form of maturity. Deep thinkers can become trapped by the desire to know what will happen before they act. They want certainty. They want to calculate every consequence. But life does not offer that level of control. At some point, action requires uncertainty. You choose the career without knowing exactly where it will lead. You start the project without knowing whether people will care. You enter a relationship without knowing how it will end. You move forward without guarantees. The mature reflective person does not eliminate uncertainty.